We all vaccinate our flocks against certain diseases to protect our birds in the best possible way against infection and disease. Also to prevent vertical transmission, and in addition, also to protect the progeny during the early phase in life through maternal antibodies, which are transferred from our parent flocks through the egg to the progeny. So it's very clear that vaccination plays a central role in poultry health management and remains one of the most important tools, together with biosecurity, to prevent infectious disease, reduce production losses, and improve overall the flock robustness. And if you look to the left side of the slide, you see into vaccination program design, a lot of factors play a role to come to a good vaccination program. But even with a well-designed program, vaccination does not guarantee full protection under field conditions. And I will come back later on this. Looking to the requirements for a successful immune response, to achieve a strong immune response after vaccination, many requirements must be met simultaneously. And again, you see this in the picture. First of all, we need to have healthy chicks, well-nourished chicks. They also need to be immunocompetent to mount an adequate immune response after vaccination. Secondly, we need to have the correct vaccine selected, and that vaccine needs also to be properly stored, because if vaccine quality can be already compromised before we administer it if storage conditions are not appropriate. In addition, good administration techniques are also very, very critical. Even the best vaccine will fail to induce a good immune response if application is poor or inconsistent. So it's clear from the slide that many factors will influence vaccination success. If one of these factors is compromised, is affected, the immune response also may be compromised. And I think we've all experienced this, but even in vaccinated flocks, outbreaks can still occur. And that can be because of various reasons. In some situations, there might be a high challenge pressure, which exceeds the protection generated by the vaccine. And certainly when their biosecurity is also poor or insufficient. But also other causes like vaccine strain mismatch versus the field strain, inadequate vaccination programs, immunosuppression, poor application, poor vaccine storage and handling can in the end result into an outbreak in a vaccinated flock. So it's very clear that many factors, and certainly related to the vaccination, can be compromised, and therefore vaccination should never be assumed to be successful without verification. And that is exactly why vaccination monitoring is essential. With a good monitoring program, we can verify the level of success or failure. We can assess the vaccine take, the uniformity of the flock, the response of the flock, and overall the quality of the response. So it's actually a quality control measure. It helps us to detect vaccination failures early, and in that way we can also take corrective actions. Furthermore, with the data generated in monitoring programs, we can improve and optimize the efficiency of the vaccination programs, and it overall provides us objective data to support technical and management decisions to further improve health and performance of our flocks. So let's look to ELISA as a monitoring tool for vaccination monitoring. ELISA remains today one of the most practical and widely used methods for vaccination monitoring in poultry. And with ELISA, we are going to measure a specific part of the immune response. We are going to take a look to the humoral immune response, the humoral systemic immune response, because we will test serum samples. And in those serum samples with ELISA, we detect and quantify the level of antibodies present in that sample. When our flocks come into contact with a pathogen, if this is through infection or through vaccination, they will develop antibodies. And the first response is IgM, and shortly after that, they also will develop an IgG response. And that is what we are going to measure with most ELISAs. If the flock comes for the second time into contact with the same pathogen, you get a boosting effect, which you can see on that graph, and you get elevated antibody levels. And that is exactly what we are going to measure. So with ELISA, we get actually quantitative data presented as titers. What is very important is that titers are kit supplier dependent. So you can't compare titers obtained between different kits from different suppliers. That's important to know. But within one supplier, you perfectly can then compare results. So based on ELISA results, you can then do trend analysis over time. You can follow your flock over time and look to the antibodies over time. You can also compare between flocks, between farms, vaccination programs. It's a very practical tool, easy to use, not expensive. It can also be automated, and that makes it really why it is a good, excellent tool for routine vaccination monitoring in poultry. And with the data, you get actionable results. You get results if you interpret them well, which can help you to take data-driven, well-founded decisions. Actually, you can compare it a little bit to the dashboard of your car. On that dashboard, you see how much fuel you have. Based on this, you can decide if you have enough fuel in the car to make the trip to your end destination, or if you need to refuel. Looking to the speed, you can know if you are at risk for a speeding ticket or not. And can take a decision to lower your speed or not. So that's a little bit similar what you can do with ELISA results. Looking to an ELISA report, and I've put one on the right side of the screen. You see there is a lot of data on that report. ELISA is a flock monitoring tool. So if you look on the bottom of that report, you see for every individual sample, the raw data and the titer results. Yeah. For vaccination monitoring, in general, we will not look into individual results. We are going to focus on the upper half of the report, so the histogram you have, and on the right upper side, also the summary table. And in there, you see the mean titer. And that is a parameter where we are going to look to, because that mean titer gives us an idea about the intensity of the response of our flock, not of a single bird, but our entire flock. Secondly, we're going to look to the percentage CV, the coefficient of variation. Why are we going to look to this one? Because this will give us an indication about the uniformity of the response of our flock. And then we also look to the percentage or the number of seroconversion. That means the number of birds or samples that tested positive on our test. And that is certainly important in live priming, and sometimes more important than the percentage CV, because with live priming, you can sometimes have low titers, a high variation. So then it's better to also take a look to the seroconversion level. And to make it easy, as sometimes you also will see the vaccination index. And the vaccination index is actually the ratio between the mean titer and the percentage CV. And that is a well-defined parameter to evaluate vaccination response. Yeah. And you see all these parameters that are the critical parameters for ELISA interpretation. You can find those results in that upper right table. So by looking to that table and assessing these results, you can start doing the interpretation of your ELISAs. A single ELISA result is very difficult to interpret. It gives you some information, but it's very difficult to make a full interpretation about these results. To get a lot of value out of your data, you need to do consistent monitoring. And you need to build baselines. And what are baselines? Baselines are actually target ranges of the expected antibody response under an optimal vaccination condition. And you will establish this for the mean titer, the percentage CV, and the vaccination index if you want. So there you are going to look to several healthy flocks which were well vaccinated and which you sampled at the same sampling times. And based on these results, you will develop baselines, target ranges, um, target ranges from normal, what we would call a normal vaccine response for your vaccination program under your conditions. Many kit suppliers will have standard basic baselines for standard vaccination programs. So if you start monitoring, you can approach your kit manufacturer to ask for the baselines. But it is very important that you establish your baselines for your vaccination program under your conditions, taking into account your monitoring program also, and make your own baselines over time. And then based on this, you can start doing interpretation of ELISA results where you will compare results against your baselines. And if the results deviate from what is expected, you can take corrective actions. So if you now look schematically and you have defined your baselines, so what you would call this is the titer or the percentage CV or my vaccination index, which I expect with a normal vaccine response, then you can compare the next results against these baselines. And if you look to the mean titer and the mean titer is lower than what you would expect, then you can conclude it was a poor vaccination. If the mean titer is much higher than what you would expect, then this may be an indication that there was an infection. Looking to the percentage CV, you do the same. Let's say for good inactivated vaccination, my CV should be, I say something below between 20 and 60%. If it's lower than 20%, it may indicate that my flock was infected, because then, in general, you will get very low CVs. If it's a high CV, indicating there is a lot of variability in my results, then it may indicate a poor vaccination. Yeah. And the same for your vaccination index. You have a range defined where you say, this is what I would say the range where I expect a normal vaccine response. If it's below that range, it may be poor vaccination. If it's above that range, I need to think about infection. Yeah. Always link also results in the case you suspect infection to what you see in that flock. Looking to recommended monitoring time points for broilers, sampling is done at two main time points. If we want to assess maternal antibodies, we will sample our broilers the first week of life, looking to our vaccine response or a potential challenge. We are going to monitor as late as possible in life. And why? Because antibodies take time before they develop. So the moment you get a vaccination or a challenge, the chick needs some time before those antibodies are developed and can be detected. So therefore, we advise to sample around slaughter age, both to assess your vaccination as well as to look for potential infection. Looking to breeders and layers, their monitoring should be done at multiple time points. Looking to maternal antibodies, of course, you're also going to sample in the first week of life. And then for our vaccination and to see throughout life that there is no challenge happening, you at least sample 3 times, preferably more, but 3 would be the absolute minimum, I would say. First of all, it's very important that you are going to assess live priming. Yeah. So before you do your killed antigen exposure, your killed vaccination, you're going to assess if the live priming resulted in the expected response. After killed exposure, after killed vaccination, you're going to sample your second time to assess your killed vaccination. Looking to live priming, in general, for most vaccines, we advise to sample 2 to 5 weeks after the last live priming. And for a killed vaccine, 4 to 8 weeks after the killed vaccine application. Yeah. And then we also advise breeders and layers to at least test 1 time during production, but preferably more to see that your titers persist during the production phase. So in ideal circumstances, you test beginning of production, mid of production, and end of production. And on the left side, right side, you see a graph. If you have a good live priming and a good INAC application, that actually works synergistically. So you see after live priming, you will get, in most cases, small to medium titers. Yeah, and then you do a boostering, an inactivated vaccine, and you really get elevated titers. And if they were both done properly, those titers will only gradually decline. They persist during the production phase of your flock. However, if you only did live priming, or if the inapplication was not done properly, then you will get only low titers, which quickly disappear during the lifespan of your flock. If the inactivation was only done, or there was a poor priming and a good inactivation, and you only monitor after the INAC application, then it will look like you have a similar response as for a live and INAC application, and I'm now referring to IBD, IBV, NDV. Uh, but those titers will not persist. They will quickly drop during the production phase, which is for IBV, NDV also a risk for your flock, but which also will result in less maternal antibody transfer to your progeny in the case of a breeder flock. So it's very important when you start monitoring that you develop a structured monitoring program aligned with your vaccination program and that monitors throughout the production cycle as well. In the case of challenge, you could also do paired sampling to look if you see significant increases, but we'll discuss this also during the examples. Looking to requirements for reliable ELISA interpretation, there are a couple of things that needs to be met to come to reliable data and reliable interpretation. First of all, it's very important that representative sampling is happening, and that means random selection of birds in the flock for the samples, as well as adequate sample size. Secondly, ELISA interpretation can only be done well if we have reliable test results, and we'll discuss also in the next slides. And reliable means they need to be accurate and precise. And it's important to ask the lab to run a reference control with the samples, but we'll discuss this also later. Secondly, for us veterinarians, it's important that we develop baselines, that we know what is considered for us, for our situation, our vaccination program, our chicks, what is a normal expected vaccination response. And then to do the proper interpretation, we need to have context, we need to have flock information. So looking to representative sampling, one part is we need to randomly select birds in a house. And in a cage system, you randomly select cages, and then in those cages, a bird for sampling. In non-cage systems, also there, we randomly select the birds for sampling. And this really needs to be done over the entire house, So look to this, and I'm going to explain in this schematic figure why this is important. Imagine this is our house, and in the lower half of the house, the bottom half, our water lines are working perfectly. In the upper half, the water lines are not that excellent. And we are going to do a drinking water administration application for our vaccination. Depending on where we are going to sample, we may end up with 3 different conclusions. If we walk to the upper half of the house and we're only going to select birds for sampling in that part of the house, it may look like our entire flock was not vaccinated at all. If we are only going to select birds for sampling in the lower half of the house, it will look like our flock was only was vaccinated properly, because there the water lines are working. It's only when we walk and across through the house and sample a bird every few meters that we will see that vaccination was only partially successful. So it's very important that you sample throughout the entire house. Looking to sample size, recommended sample size is 23 samples. Certainly, if you still need to establish your own baselines or if you want to do vaccination date prediction for IBD. And I know it's often a balance between costs and ideal sample size. But if you lower the sample size, and you have some outliers, the risk becomes bigger that those outliers will affect your result and in the end your interpretation. So the lower your sample number gets, the less reliable your interpretation will be and even can come to wrong conclusions. Yeah. So to get a really representative result for your entire flock, 23 samples is recommended. I would say 18 is the minimum. And just to show you how sample size can affect your results, on the right side of the slide, you see a trial we did where we sampled 100 individual day-old chicks. We defined a mean titer based on these 100 samples and obtained a titer of 4,000, an average mean titer of 4,057. The percentage CV was 48, and based on vaccination date prediction, based on the log2 method and the Deventer method, we came to 19 and 21 days. Then we randomly divided those samples into smaller sample groups of 46 samples, 30, 23, 15, 10, and 5. And we repeated this 16 times per group, where we randomly selected X number of samples and analyzed them. And you see in this table the minimum mean titer we found and the maximum mean titer, the same for the percentage CV and for our days to vaccinate, the calculations to predict our vaccination date. And you see, once you go from 23 to 15, your mean titer, you see the variation gets bigger the lower your sample size gets, but the mean titer starts deviating more than 20% from our original result obtained on 100 samples. Also on the CV, you see that those variability, the CVs we obtain, the range gets much larger, and there is much more variation there between the results, and the same with your vaccination date prediction. You see the lower your sample size gets, the more it starts deviating from your original predictions. So the less reliable your data gets. So it's not worth to take 10 or 5 samples. Looking to reliable test results, and that's very, very important. If we get results as a veterinarian and they deviate from what we expect, the first thing we do is blaming the lab that there was is a mistake. We never look to maybe the vaccination is off, maybe this can be happening. So to avoid this, you can ask the lab to run a reference control. A reference control is a positive serum sample which has a known titer. So you know when you run this sample, the titer needs to be within this range to be okay. Yeah, and you see this also on the report. And if it's in range, you know that the results you get from the lab are accurate and reproducible, which means if you would send the samples to another lab, which also does an excellent analysis on the same kit from the same supplier, but maybe another batch, you would need to obtain the same results. So that is very important because we want to do comparisons that we know we get accurate and reproducible results, so reliable results, which we can compare. And then to make our full interpretation, of course, it's very important that we have flock information and that we also know the clinical picture to make the right conclusions. So, of course, we need to know the type of bird, but also the vaccination history, which vaccines were used, which strains, what method, timing of vaccination, and I will explain how this can affect or impact results. Interpretation, also the age at sampling. We need to have baselines as a reference point to which we can compare. And if all this is correctly done, then we really can do a good and meaningful interpretation. So we need to have the reliable result, we need to have baselines, and we need to have context information. Looking to variables which can affect interpretation, first of all, sampling timing. It's very important that we always sample at the same time. Because if we sample later or earlier, it can affect our interpretation. And here you see just an IBD vaccination, and we monitored 7 days after vaccination, 14 days, 21, 28. And so 7 days after vaccination, you see the mean titer is very low. Looking to the histogram, you see also in the titer group 0, that first column which you see in the histogram, which we call titer group 0, that are samples which are still negative. So only a few birds already developed antibodies then can be detected by the ELISA. So for vaccination monitoring, this is not a good moment to assess the success of your vaccine. It's too early. You prefer to wait until you obtain the maximum response to make a proper assessment. So looking to 14 days, you of course see in the histogram, your samples are shifting more to the right. So that means they become positive. You still have one negative, and all the rest already have shifted to more to the right of the curve, where they are medium positive. And you also see this reflected in the mean titer. You also see that many of the birds are already, or samples tested positive and closely together, so your variation gets smaller, and you have a CV of 44%. Going then again a week later, the titer is not increased, but we sampled also different birds, so you obtained 5,000, CV slightly drops. 28 days after vaccination, you see 6,801. We are probably around to maximum response, and a nice CV of 33%. And that's actually where you, if you always continuously sample at the same moment, at 28 days, for example, then you know this is what you could expect in your case. Looking to vaccination timing also will affect serological response, and I need to say vaccination timing and the presence of maternal antibodies. Yeah. Here I show you an example of a Newcastle vaccination in broilers. So the upper flock, if you look to the results up, then you see a spray vaccination, which happened for the first time at 3 days of age. So in the presence of still high levels of maternal antibodies, because you see at day 1, this flock had significant levels of maternal antibodies against Newcastle disease. And then for the second time, it was vaccinated at 17 days. The flock on the bottom, so it was on the same farm, started at the same level of maternal antibodies, but the first Newcastle spray vaccination was done at 9 days of age, so where my maternal antibodies were already declined quite significantly. And then you see, if you monitor at slaughter age, the flock I vaccinated for the first time with the presence of maternal antibodies will have a lower mean titer after vaccination at slaughter age. So between 1,000 and 2,000, while my other flock, which was vaccinated at 9 days and 23 days of age, so later, will have titers at slaughter age between between 2,000 and 4,000. What is very important, the height of the titer in this case is only important to assess the success of your vaccination. Don't confuse this with protection, because for Newcastle disease, many flocks are vaccinated in the presence of high levels of maternal antibodies. Yeah. Um, and that is to induce also local immunity. Yeah. And if you vaccinate in the presence of high levels of maternal antibodies, of course, the side thing is that it can delay circumversion and can reduce, of course, the response. But on the other side, that local protection is also something important, and that we do not measure with ELISA. So be very clear to not confuse my end result with protection, because many flocks which are vaccinated against Newcastle or IBV early in life seem to be well protected. It's just to that you realize you need to take this into account to develop your baselines. Looking to application method, that also can have an effect on the serological response. So also there, that's why it's important to develop baselines on your for your own vaccination program. Here you see 4 broiler flocks, which were vaccinated again twice with a live Newcastle disease vaccine at 1 and 14 days of age. 2 flocks through drinking water administration, and 2 flocks through core spray vaccination. So you see first the maternal antibodies, which are quite low. They slightly drop 7 days. And then you see titers increasing, and depending on the application, you see a different profile. So it's very important, again, that you make baselines based on what you do in the field. So let's go through some practical application case studies. The data I show, many of the data is from customers. We are not here to assess their vaccination program, but we are looking to assess the vaccine response. Yeah. So again, if we do want to do interpretation, it's very important that we have baselines. And as mentioned, you can ask these to your manufacturer if you just start with monitoring. You can ask your manufacturing to guide you a little bit, but it is important to develop your own baselines. This customer has done this. This is from an integration. And here you see 2 broiler flocks which were sampled at slaughter age. Those were 2 flocks from the same integration. They received the same vaccination program for Newcastle disease. So at day 1, they received an inactivated Lasota vaccine, and they also received 3 times a live vaccine, starting from day 1 and later in life. And then samples were collected at slaughter age. In this case, this would be around 40 days. And you immediately see, if you only look to the histogram, that there is already a difference between the flock on the left and the flock on the right. On the flock on the right, if you look to the histogram, you see that there are still quite a significant number of samples which test negative, and which this vaccination program, this is not what you would expect. Yeah. So, but what are we going to look at? Mean titer, percentage CV, the number of seropositivity, and then we look to our vaccination index. So looking to the flock on the left, we have a mean titer of 4,700 and a bit. Our percentage CV is 43. If you look in the second white box, then you see this customer has defined baselines, and he says my mean titer needs to be between 1,000 and 8,000, and my CV needs to be between 40 and 80. So this perfectly within his expectations. So this would be considered a proper vaccination result, a successful vaccination for the flock, and the vaccination program under his conditions. And you also see this then on the bottom in the vaccination index, which is the mean titer divided by the percentage CV. He has 111, expects it needs to be between 50 and 280. So this is a normal successful vaccination response. Looking to the flock on the right, the mean titer is lower. We already said it. By looking to the histogram, we saw that there were 7 samples still negative. And you also see this, of course, reflected in the percentage CV. If you look to that histogram, you have negative samples, some low positives, and then a few medium positives, which results in a high CV, yeah, much higher than what you would expect based on the baselines. They said the maximum allowed would be 80. We are at 101. Looking to our vaccination index, which is 26, we expect for a good vaccination that it would be between 50 and 280. So in this case, we have negative titers, low and actually not a great uniformity in this flock, which is reflected in the high CV. Also in this dispersed pattern, so this indicates a poor vaccination result. An important thing with live vaccines, and that can happen with many live vaccines, is a post-vaccination reaction or a rolling vaccine infection. And this can happen with any live vaccination if there is a poor vaccination, underdosing or poor coverage. So you see it in the pictures. We hit some birds, we miss some birds. Some of those birds that are hit will develop a normal vaccine reaction and response. Those which we miss will come into contact with the vaccine later in life through the vaccinated birds, and they will heavily then react also on the vaccination. That's what we call a rolling vaccine. So you actually get a wave of virus that floats through your house. And you can see this in your ELISA results. So this is a broiler flock which was vaccinated with live ND vaccine at the age of 1 day and 18 days, and which is sampled at slaughter age 41 days. And here you see, if you look to the histogram, you already see it. You really have a dispersed pattern where you see you have negative birds, some low positive birds, you have then some medium positive birds, and then you have extremely high positive birds. Yeah. Looking to my mean titer, I have actually a quite nice mean titer, which if I look to my baseline, my target titers, it falls within what I would consider as a mean titer, still a normal response. But based on what I see on the histogram, I already know something is off. Yeah. Looking to my percentage CV, you see a very high CV. And when your CV gets higher than 120%, in such cases, this is already an indication of a rolling vaccine infection, a poor vaccination. Yeah. Due to my normal mean titer and my high CV, if I take the ratio, I end up with a low vaccination index indicating a poor vaccination. Yeah. So based on serology, you really can assess what is happening there. Let's now go to IBD, another important disease, infectious bursal disease. And here you see results from a vaccination trial that happened under field conditions. So these were 3 broiler houses on the same farm, which all received a different vaccine. So the flock or the house represented by the red line received an IBD vector vaccine. The house represented by the green line received an immune complex vaccine in ovo, and the black line was a house where the birds were vaccinated with a live intermediate vaccine D78 at 17 days of age. Yeah. If you now look to this, based on the vaccines, you see different serologic profiles, and that's certainly what I want you to show on the slide. You also see why it is important to monitor around slaughter age, because that's where you will see the vaccine response phase. So if we look into the yellow block of the slide, you see that our maternal antibodies are declining over the first 2 to 3 weeks of life, and this is normal. Yeah, you see also that there are significant maternal antibody levels in these birds, and then you see the different responses dependent on the vaccine. Yeah, you also see that a good a measurable response only happen on the last part, so that's where you would like to monitor to assess success, the success of your vaccination. Looking to the vector vaccine, which is represented by the red line, it remains quite flat, so it only goes slightly up at 5 and 6 weeks. This is normal on a classical whole virus IBD ELISA. So a classical whole virus IBD ELISA is not ideal or for vector vaccine monitoring, and at least not to measure the success of your vaccination for IBD. For this, you really need to go to certainly in broiler flocks to an specific kit for that purpose. In layer breeder flocks, you could also monitor your sampling moment to a later phase where antibodies would become to a detectable level. So, but it's very important that you monitor at the right time, that you know what is happening over time, so that you know you need to monitor there to evaluate the success of your vaccination. And this also shows that you need to know what to expect when using this kit for your flocks based on that vaccination program. So you need to know what a normal vaccine response look like. As said, a classical whole virus IBD ELISA is not the best kit, certainly not in broilers, because they only live for a short time, and to assess the success of your vector vaccination. But what you can do with that flock is look if there has been a challenge. Yeah. And here you see, this is now from a trial, not in field conditions, but here you see, well, we have 3 groups again. The dark red line is my vector vaccinated flock, yeah, where you see at 45 or 42 days, I only have a mild response on my kit. Again, this is what we expect, yeah. The green line, that is the flock which was vector vaccinated and challenged at 28 of 8 days of age. So you see, if that flock gets challenged, titers. So if I get significant titers on my kit, I know there has been a field challenge. And the red line, just to indicate, was a flock that was only challenged and not vaccinated. And there you also clearly see the effect on the antibodies from the challenge at 28 days of age. Looking to breeder vaccination, of course, also there we want to monitor our vaccination. These are breeders vaccinated one time early in life with an intermediate vaccine, early in life, 3-4 weeks, and sampled at 10 weeks of age. If we look these are two flocks from the same integration. If we look to the flock on the top and the flock on the bottom, we already see, based on the histogram, there is a completely different response. Looking to the flock on top, what do we see? All samples are positive, 100% seropositivity. I have a mean titer of 7,000 and a bit. And based on baselines, we would expect it to be between 4,000 and 12,000. Vaccination index, we would expect to be between 100 and 500. It's 294. This looks like a proper vaccination response. Looking to the flock on the bottom, we see it already on the histogram. My samples all are on the left side of the histogram, indicating negative and low titers. So I only have a 67% seropositivity. And in breeders, I would aim after a live IBD vaccination for 100%. So that is already too low. Looking to my mean titer, arrhythmic mean titer, it's 772. So also very low to what I would expect. And this is reflected also in my vaccination index. You see, for this flock on the bottom, my vaccination, my CV goes up to 74. So I have a low mean titer, a higher CV, which results in a low vaccination index of 10, below what I would expect, because 100 would be my absolute minimum. So this indicates a low, poor vaccination. In breeders, you also want to monitor over time, and not because of the breeders, because late in life there is age resistance for IBD. But for my progeny, I do want to have maternal antibody transfer to the progeny to protect my progeny in the early phase of life. So it's very important after vaccination that my titers do persist in my breeder flock. So here you see at 0 weeks, which is day 1, my maternal antibodies of my breeder flock. At 10 weeks, you see the result of my live IBD vaccination. At 20 weeks is already after my INAC application, and then you see that those titers do remain very persistent till 55 weeks. And this is what you would like, because during the entire production phase, you want to have that there is enough maternal antibody transfer to the progeny. Looking to infectious bronchitis, it always works the same way. Here you see, again, breeders 3 times live vaccinated, 10 weeks of age. Both flocks received the same vaccination program, sampled at the same time. The flock on top, good priming, mean titer within the range I would expect. Also my CV. Everything is positive, which I would expect for this program. And my vaccination index is also within range. This is good priming. The flock on the bottom, poor priming. I have some negative and low titers. An average mean titer of 2,600, which is already on the low side for this program. My percentage CV 80, and that results in a low vaccination index indicating poor priming. This is a field case, broiler flock vaccinated 1 time with IBV, first day of life. At 25 days of age, the birds have symptoms, respiratory symptoms, increased mortality. And you also see this in the results at slaughter age. So in this case, you clearly see a high mean titer, way above what we expect. My CV gets just below what I would expect, but looking to my vaccination index, and that is sometimes easier to interpret because not all parameters may always clearly go to one side. But if I divide my mean titer, take the ratio between my mean titer and the percentage CV, in this case, I get a very high vaccination index, indicating there was, in this case, based on the clinical symptoms, a challenge. This shows you why monitoring is important and why early detection matters. And this is also an IBV field case in broiler breeders. Here you see at 24 weeks the results. They have quite significant titers for IBV. They didn't monitor before. You see the percentage hatch and the percentage egg production, and suddenly after 48 weeks, you see a drop happening. At 52 weeks, they sample, and my mean titers are quite similar to 24. The question is, what happened? To be very honest, if you don't have baselines, it's also very hard for me to assess. And if you didn't monitor on critical moments, so like your live priming, it's very difficult to make conclusions. This farm or this owner did have samples in his freezer, and we looked retrospectively back into this. And here you see there was a poor priming, very low mean titers, and a high CV. He did do a proper inactivation, which after inactivation resulted in high titer response, a normal response. Maybe even if he would have baselines, we don't know. But because the priming was poor, those titers do not persist. And what you see is in the production phase, they start dropping till the level where that flock, of course, gets hit by an IBV field virus, and of course, with all consequences happening. Looking to the cost of the infection, that was estimated to be 71 euro cents per bird. If you look to the cost of a proper monitoring program, and that would be 0.015 euro cents per bird. And if he would be have taken action based on the poor priming results and revaccinated, that would have costed him 0.065 euro, pardon, not euro cents, euro per bird. So that would be a tenfold return on investment. Looking to CV, and I'm almost coming to the end. CV serology, we vaccinate our breeders, of course, so that our breeders develop antibodies to prevent vertical transmission, because if our breeders get infected during production, CV will be vertically transmitted to the progeny. And secondly, of course, to ensure maternal antibody transfer to the progeny, because those maternal antibodies will protect our progeny during the early phase in life. So here you see a breeder flock. How are we going to confirm the success of vaccination? On the bottom, you see the baselines we recommend. You can look to the mean titer. In this case, this is perfectly where we expected, as well as our vaccination index. So this shows it was a successful vaccination. But for CV, we always also recommend to look to the seropositivity, and you really should strive for more than 80% seropositivity in your flock. On the right side of the slide, you also see monitoring over time in the breeder flock, showing that those titers remain there, and which is a guarantee then also for the maternal antibody transfer. Looking to broilers, again, to protect our broilers during the early phase, we want to have, of course, significant levels of maternal antibodies and all birds seroconverted to protect our broilers against disease. As CV is omnipresent, many broiler flocks might be, to a certain extent, show some positivity at slaughter age. On top, you see a flock where there is minimal seroconversion, but that is a non-clinical broiler flock. On the bottom, when you see a result like this, this is from a clinical flock. To end, key take-home messages, I think what is very important is that ELISA provides more than just a titer on a report. If you do the interpretation correctly, it's a very powerful tool to evaluate your vaccinations, to identify deviations. And then I mean, both in case of poor vaccination or potential field challenge, and to support and take action on the results and to support decision making in there. Proper sampling, key to get meaningful results. It's also important for good interpretation that you build and refine your own baselines. If you make changes, adapt your baselines, changes to the vaccination program or to the monitoring program, you should adapt your baselines. Accurate interpretation requires a full flock information, but if you do everything right, data can be turned into actionable results. And that's where the value lays from vaccination monitoring with ELISA. Thank you very much.